Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Dr. Susan Kahn on the show. Hello to you, Susan.
Hello, Julian. Lovely to be here with you.
Yeah, this is your second time on the show, so I'm really pleased to have you back because we're going to talk a bit about reinventing yourself based on a book you've written recently. But just to remind the audience who you are. You're a business psychologist, you're a practitioner, and you're an academic as well. And you're an author of 3 books, with the latest one being about reinventing yourself. And we're going to be exploring that in more detail, where people might feel stuck, and then how we can help them reinvent themselves and what that might involve. Before we go there, Susan, I'd like to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
It's such a lovely question, Julian. I think that part of it is really just having conversations and going a bit below the surface with people, having an opportunity to get to know people, what motivates them, what they feel happy about, what they want to develop. And I think that curiosity about the other is something that I love, and I think I probably always will.
Yes, and likewise, we're both in a similar field. I love being curious. People call it being nosy, but I call it being curious about people, but understanding and helping people to discover for themselves who they are and what motivates them. And we're talking about reinventing yourself. So now, what does it mean from your perspective, and in the context within sort of personal and professional life? What does reinventing mean for you?
Well, I think it's the spirit of life. It's the fact that we very rarely stay still, even if we're committed to perhaps just one profession or one relationship or one place where we live. We're constantly evolving. We're constantly learning new things, taking on new roles. So the idea of reinvention, I think, is very much part of who we are as human beings, that we're striving, we're looking forward, we're thinking about ways of creating greater interest in our lives and perhaps testing ourselves a bit. So it can be as simple and as complex as you like. It can be a shift in mindset, or it can be a whole new career, a whole new place of work, a whole new place to live. So I think it's one of those characteristics that features in most of our working lives, and unless we're feeling really bored and stuck and dull.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. I think we're always evolving, always changing, always hopefully adapting and learning as we go, in whatever we do in our personal life, also in our professional life. But for me, I see reinventing almost, it's quite a significant point in your time where you take some time out to, I guess, take stock and think, I want to do something differently, or whether that's a career thing or even just a slight shift in something. But there's a moment, isn't it? And what do you think causes those moments where people go, do you know what? I want to change this. Something's happening. I want to change the way I do things, the narratives in my life, the story I'm sort of leading. I want to change that. And what do you think causes those sort of those moments, I guess?
Well, I think first of all, you're absolutely right. To reinvent, you need to pause and think. You need to get off that kind of hamster wheel of activity and just pause and reflect on where you are. But there can be all sorts of reasons why we might sort of face that interruption, that need to stop. It could be about one of the liminal phases in life. It could be that we have a relationship breakdown, or we're approaching a significant birthday. Very interestingly, lots of research shows that people who are having a 9 in their birthday very often do something very significant in that following year as they anticipate entering into a new decade. So it could be that you're recovering from illness. It could be that you've had a relationship breakdown. It could be that you've suddenly had an aha moment when you've looked at patterns of working life and you just think, I don't want to do this anymore. Or it could be as simple as someone sort of making a comment to you about, oh, well, you'll always be here. We can rely on you. That might make you think, hang on a minute, that's not true. There might be other things for me. So really a huge range of things that might generate that sort of moment of reflection. But I think your point about stopping to think is critical, and having the opportunity to actually consider, what are my options? You know, is it right to stay, or could I look at other things to do? Doing a bit of due diligence on yourself almost to find out where your strengths are, where you really want to thrive.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody the other day. I moved from my career. I reinvented myself 7 years ago, I guess. And they actually said that to me. They said, "Oh, it's been great seeing you on LinkedIn, how you reinvented yourself from what you were before," which I thought, and I'd not even spoken to her about reinventing and that phrase. And I think, I had a moment. Mine was probably a slightly difficult moment. I had a sort of a workplace sort of toxic environment that created a moment for me to think about my career. But also, what collided with that was my wife and I were looking to foster as well. And that moment, wanting some flexibility, independence, and that started to make me think, well, what do I really want to do? And I started to then soul search a little bit. So sometimes in those moments, and it's grabbing those moments, isn't it? Not missing
Yeah.
sometimes that adversity. It could be an adversity of a difficult thing. I've interviewed many people who've done lots of things, amazing things out of adversity has got them there, hasn't there?
Mm. And just to acknowledge the enormity of what you just said, I think sometimes when your values surface, in your case, when you were looking to foster for others, when it might be about caring for a sort of a sick or elderly relative, we begin to think what really matters to us. And that can be the spur for reinvention. But what I also believe absolutely is that, you know, at those moments where we do crash, perhaps we have a breakdown that we certainly wouldn't have invited or welcomed, we can also break through at those moments. That it's only when we've kind of sunk pretty low that we can begin to think, right, what else? How do I want to live my life? What are my priorities? So this sort of sense of it being a nice, clean, linear path where we just gradually progress and develop simply isn't how life works, as everybody listening to this will know. But to be mindful of the fact that if you do have a dark time, if you are bullied at work, or you do have a business that collapses, or you do have a relationship breakdown that means you need to sort of change location, that, of course, is difficulty and adversity, but it's also a chance to refresh who you are and how you choose to live your life.
Yeah, and I've interviewed many people who've either lost limbs and had very difficult
Mm,
things, and completely reinvented themselves and who, what they do, and the purpose has come out. And it's interesting how they're, I had a guy who he was is an ex-Gurkha, got blown up in Afghanistan, lost both of his legs, and then now went on to climb Mount Everest with as a double above the knee amputee, which is quite amazing, really. And then he's now a ambassador for making the impossible in sense people with disability. That's his purpose. That's his mission, and he's turned something that was incredibly negative and horrible into something so powerful and so beautiful now. So where do we start? Whether it's an adversity, whether it's I'm just bored of my job, or actually I'm just feeling a bit stuck in my career, what to do? Where should we start, and how we should explore this reinvention, and what do we need to do first?
Well, I think, acknowledging that most beginnings start with an ending of sorts is a good place to start. That in order to reinvent, we need to perhaps relinquish old roles or out of date narratives to start looking forward with perhaps a new sense of who you are. So that's a good place to start. We mentioned due diligence, to think about what it is you're prepared to give up. And for some people, that will mean giving up of something which looks outwardly is deeply attractive. So it might be a job that pays a lot of money, or a sort of an environment where you have lots of perks, but it doesn't feed your soul. It doesn't give you what you need. So to start with that investigation of what really matters to you. we of course have to do the things we need to do to get by, to pay the rent, to look after our families, to do what needs to be done. But beyond that, what is it that really makes you sing, makes your heart soar, makes you feel that it's worth getting up in the morning with some excitement and some joy? And I don't want to paint a picture that every day of working life should be something that's utterly joyful, because that's not realistic. But if we are going
That's
to,
what I see on Instagram all the time, Susan. That's how it is, isn't it?
yeah, we're just missing the trick, Julian. I think
I
we
think so.
lost out on that. But the idea that if you are going to make a change, it should be a change that really matters to you, that you're not changing just for the sake of it, but you're making a change because it aligns with the things that do really count for you, the things that make a difference in the world. And it could be about something linked to your concerns for the environment, or your desire to help others, or your wish to direct your talent and skill towards something that can really be impactful. Um, and that could also mean, making more money if that's something that's important to you. There's nothing wrong with that. It's about really being clear about what matters to you.
So we're talking here about sort of getting clarity on purpose, aren't we? In terms of that understanding who we are and what we're made for. I think somebody said to me once, two most important things in your life, two most important days in your life: the day you were born and the day you realize why you were born, type of thing, in terms of that sort of purpose or mission. And I like the idea that almost giving up things. I think people forget about that, don't they? They think
Mhm.
about just going on to the next thing, but actually you might have to give it something up to get there, because that new
Yeah.
narrative, new story, new way of doing things. Otherwise, you'll just take baggage with you, and you'll just slow you down.
Yeah.
What are the ways? I mean, that can be quite difficult, as you say, giving up a big job or people workplace you like working in to pursue this purpose. What are the sort of helps that you found helping your clients and people you're involved with to
Mm.
sort of keep things up?
I mean, one of the things to hold in mind is that when we move on to do something different, we don't lose the experience and the expertise and the environment that we perhaps had some success or some pleasure. It's still there. I write in the book about the Marriott principle, the idea of the Russian dolls, where we have an external image that we present to the world, but underneath that a number of identities that have been forged over the years of our careers, over our different relationships, over our childhoods, and they stay there. They're still very much part of us, and yet we perhaps are interacting in the world with a particular identity of the moment. And I like to hold that in mind when working with clients, and also for myself, in that it can help to make those decisions. Recently, when I gave up a role in an academic institution, I grappled with the loss of status that might be associated with that, until I came to, apply the lessons to myself and think, it's there, it's still there for you. It just means that you're choosing to prioritize a different way of working. So I think holding on to who you are, being not just about what you're doing right now, is an important principle.
And that's a big thing, isn't it? That whole who you are and taking the
Mm,
time out to self-discover who you are. I think we often run through life very quickly and jump onto the next thing very quickly and do things, and we do less of the human being, of just being and just being present and reflecting, because that's really important, isn't it? Part of this process is taking time out. I know myself, when I did sort of move and look to reinvent, although I didn't know entirely sure what I was reinventing at that time. It wasn't that very clear, but I started to take some time out to reflect. I take walks in the woods and start
mm,
to journal things and start to unpick almost, what are my values? What do I stand for? What do I really want? What do I really enjoy? What am I really good at? All that sort of started to sort of
mm,
bubble up. And I think you need to take time out before you start to make steps to go for something. Because if you don't know what the future looks like, then you don't know what you're going for, I guess, are you?
Yeah, and I think that what's also very true in what you said at the beginning of that about, what do you do? Who are you? As if there is a simple, clean, crisp answer to that question. And we're sort of educated from a fairly young age to address the issue of, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or, which direction is your career heading? And we are so much more complex than that. There are so many different identities that we might want to hold. Yes, we might want to be a kind of a marketing executive, but we also might want to be a stand-up comic and an artist, and also care for our elderly relatives, and also perhaps start a new relationship. This idea of the complexity of our identities and the multiple roles. There's a lot of talk about multi-hyphen identities, this sense that we're not just one thing. And I guess that your moments of reflection and my own have illustrated the fact that, yes, there are some labels that can attach quite neatly, like coach and psychologist, but actually there's so much more that goes on that isn't necessarily clearly defined by those labels.
Yeah, and we obviously get sort of, I guess, affected by our upbringing and our sort of whole childhood, our memories, our experiences throughout life. And we know that, our brains are formed and neurons are all neural pathways are all formed early on. But I think people don't realize there is still neuroplasticity with our brains. It can still
Mhm.
change. So it'd be helpful if you just to explain what neuroplasticity is
Mm.
and the evidence of why it still can change, rather than this is the way you've always thought, therefore you always think this way. Actually, we can change this.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a whole chapter in the book about this, about the idea that the brain can change itself, and the power of that in terms of um, checking in on faulty heuristics. And by heuristics, I mean, shortcuts that we all create in our minds that in order to do this, we must do that. In order to achieve X, we must do Y. Those kind of decisions that we make because we've always made them. And I think one of the important things about reinvention is to celebrate the fact that we are able to rewire our brain with relative ease, doing some simple techniques that address either sort of affirmations or statements of, viewing the world in different ways can have a profound impact on the way the brain is wired. So it's something, of course, that we as coaches get involved in quite a lot, this idea of creating a space where people can rethink who they are. And indeed, being able to adjust and adapt that thinking will allow us to thrive in another way altogether. So to get rid of that old-fashioned view that we are who we are and it's fixed and can't be changed, and just to embrace the fact that we have this incredible organ that gives us an opportunity to rethink all the way through our lives. It's not just something that happens in the early years. There's so many myths.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget how much they limit themselves by saying, for example, oh, I'm not old enough, or I'm too young
Mm,
enough, or whatever it may be, maybe a phrase, maybe expression. It might have been handed down from your parents or your
mm,
siblings, and those narratives just hold us back down. Almost they limit us, and we can actually change that, which obviously is then changing those neural pathways. It's changing our story and what we can be. Now, reinventing in itself is, it's a big thing. The fact that you're
mm,
taking something from A, making it into B, and obviously there's a process obviously involved in that. In some ways, the process is more important than the whatever the end is. There's no end in this anyway. You just
mm,
continue. But when you make a significant change, what are some of the things that hold people back from? They get to that point where they recognize they want to reinvent, or they recognize through adversity that they need to reinvent.
mm.
What holds them back? What stops them going through that process or attempting to go through that process?
Well, there's many reasons why we stop ourselves from making the leap. Um, Sometimes it's as simple as, fear of failure, that we desperately want to do something, but we are so preoccupied with the idea that we might make an idiot of ourselves, or someone might laugh at us, or that people will just, remember us as we were and won't give us a chance to be something else. So there's that kind of fear factor involved. And I by no means diminish that, because I think we do have to acknowledge that it does take courage to reinvent. It does take, both self-reflection, but also action that addresses getting outside of your comfort zone, doing things that aren't necessarily easy or predictable. So that there's a kind of a fear factor involved. But you mentioned something earlier, which I think is really true. And although people hear a lot about these sort of idea of narratives in their heads, it can be a really restricting element to our reinvention. So if you have in your mind the sense that you are not a creative person, or that you're past it, or that you're um, not mathematical enough to do X or Y, or that you're not a technical person, in many ways you can literally shut down opportunities that are probably and quite possibly available to you, not because you've tried and failed, not because you're fearful, but because you haven't even given yourself the opportunity to have a go. So I think that the opening up in your own mind of the possibility of things is really critical, giving yourself the chance to just try. And it doesn't have to be a big massive action. You don't have to give up your job and drop your friends and move house. It could be a small thing. It could be something as simple as, deciding that you're not going to be so apologetic, that you're going to stop
Mm,
starting sentences with "I'm sorry," or stop blaming yourself, saying it's probably my fault, but, or, addressing messages and emails with apologies. So it doesn't have to be massive, but I think challenging that narrative,
mm.
recognizing what's going on and challenging it. There are a couple of things, fear and narratives, that come to mind.
Yeah, and those narratives, unfortunately, are well, fortunately and unfortunately, can be really powerful. If you have the
Mm,
right narrative, it can be amazing.
mm,
How do we? I mean, obviously, having a coach obviously really helps, because we help reflect, and we hear those narratives and we call them out and we challenge them. If you're on your own right now and you're listening to this and thinking, well, how do I know if I've got any narratives that are not helping me? They're not serving me anymore. What can be a little, I don't know, acid test or a check on what that might be? Do you think?
mm. Well, I think if you literally took 60 seconds to close your eyes, to allow yourself just to be in the moment with your feet on the ground and your hands on your thighs, and you just listen to what your mind is telling you, you will get an indication of whether those voices are benevolent and generous and kind, or whether they're punitive. And sadly, the majority of people have deeply punitive voices banging
Mm,
around inside their heads. So the first thing is to stop and listen. Um, and the second, if it doesn't sound too woo woo for everyone, is literally open a window, let those voices out, and try and replace them with some other voices which say, you can give this a go, or you deserve the chance, or you might fail, but you can have a go, or it doesn't need to be perfect, or you've got one life, so why not try this, something which is a bit more generous and open.
mm,
And that way you can applaud and encourage yourself, rather than diminishing and minimizing your capabilities.
mm. Yeah, it's good that getting ourselves, as you did there, in more in the moment, isn't it? And starting to
Mm.
be grounded and feel who we are, and those what's going on in our heads. It can be really helpful, because when we're ahead, we're feeling all anxious. When we're thinking of the past, we're all depressed because we can't do anything about it. In terms of when we are thinking of whatever it might be, a small reinvention, as you said, not saying sorry all the time or whatever, through to a change of career, which is more significant, or starting a new business. How do we go about getting that clarity of that destination, that focus in terms of that goals, outcomes, bearing in mind that we have no control over goals and outcomes really.
Yeah.
We think we do, but but we need to have something to aim for, something to focus on, don't we?
I mean, I think some kind of plan is very helpful. Not a rigid plan that means that, everything is worked out in detail, but the idea that for any change to take effect, you need to do something small quite regularly in order for it to be impactful. So, doing something which is a practice that opens up your thinking, whether that's just noting down the things that are important to you, about perhaps changing your mindset. Um, the notion of an abundant mindset has been explored quite a lot in terms of, manifestation and other kind of principles of, visualization. And whilst the book doesn't go into that in a great deal of detail, what I do stress is that despite the lack of an evidence base for manifestation, for example, if we don't believe that positive change is possible, then positive change is not possible. We do need to have that kind of mindset that allows us to be abundant, to imagine that there's enough space for you and me to have something to offer, that there's not just a limited area where people can excel, but that we all have scope to contribute. So I think that kind of planning, doing small things, thinking about where you want to go, and believing that you have a chance. It doesn't mean that you have to sort of think that you're going to be 100% successful at first attempt, but just a sense of, yeah, I can do this. I can give this a go. And if it doesn't work out, then what have I learned from this? What can I apply again to the next efforts that I make? And I think that can actually allow us to give ourselves permission to step into the unknown.
Yes, I like the idea of thinking more abundantly, because then the
Mhm.
opportunities start, you see them more because you're thinking that way inclined, aren't you? Rather than restricting ourselves. And whether it's law of attraction, manifestation, I think this just thinking in a more positive, more open way really does help facilitate you seeing those opportunities that you wouldn't have otherwise seen. Because there are obviously some psychological things in our brains called it's a reticular activating system, isn't it? That sort of filter.
Mm.
That's part of all that. Thank you for your. Oh, sorry, you're going to say something there, Susan.
I was just going to say something about comparison, because you mentioned LinkedIn and social media, and I just wanted to sort of bring that into our conversation about potential and the abundant mindset. And that when we look at somebody who's, perhaps, shining in some kind of format on social media, we see them at their very best. We see their shiny outsides. We imagine that that person has got the market cornered in whatever field it might be. But I think this idea of, abundance, that, yes, maybe look at that person that's shining and think, yeah, what can I learn from them? Let me sort of develop on their ideas. Let me expand that kind of thinking. So to use comparison in an inspirational way, in a benign way, rather than the kind of negative view of, oh, they've got it, I hate them, and and I'll never have a chance to do it. So that there is scope for us all to make a contribution to this mad, volatile world that we live in.
Indeed, they say that comparison is the thief of joy, isn't it?
Yeah, it
Yes.
really can be so debilitating. And
Mm.
a lesson I've taken sort of from childhood is that, there are always those that are going to be better off, more talented, cleverer, more beautiful, more eloquent than you. And there'll also be others who perhaps don't have the skills and talents you've got. So it's really destructive to compare.
Yeah, no, it is. That's a helpful point, Susan. Appreciate that. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for your helpful insights and thoughts. And I know the book is a good book and really helpful if you want to make that step to reinvent yourself. Some really helpful exercises in there, along with some sort of backed up with lots of research papers, as well as your own experience as well and stories. How can people connect and get in touch with you, Susan?
Well, they're very welcome to connect on LinkedIn or to follow me on Instagram. And I do try and share some content that'll be helpful to others if you do get in touch. So I'm always pleased to hear from people. And if you do decide to buy the book, I'd love to hear what you think about it. You can get it anywhere on Amazon and in bookshops. But there is a lot of practical help there. And I really hope, my deepest hope is that it will help those who do have a desire to reinvent to make that leap.
Excellent. And I will put a link into the show notes even about how to access it. And this is if you want a picture of it, and a
Oh,
bit more visual. So you'll see that, you'll know what it is. So that's your book. Well, thank you for your time today, Susan.
lovely to talk to you, Julian. Thank you.